At first it begins in silence, a restlessness that creeps through the body like a whisper you cannot name. You think it's loneliness. You think it's desire. But what if I told you it's transformation, an ancient energy stirring beneath the flesh, asking not for pleasure, but for evolution? When a man or woman chooses to live without sex, something extraordinary begins to unfold. It's as if the body rebels, yes, but only to awaken the soul. The mind sharpens, the senses heighten, and a strange alchemy begins within. The same force that once sought release now climbs upward, shaping thoughts, visions, and dreams. It no longer seeks another body. It seeks a higher purpose. Most people believe that abstinence weakens you, that it drains life from your spirit. But the truth is far stranger. The one who lives without sex doesn't lose power. They concentrate it. Every unspent impulse, every restrained desire becomes stored lightning waiting to strike the soul awake. This energy, when not scattered, becomes wisdom, raw, piercing, and alive. There's a hidden war inside those who abstain. The instincts scream, the body burns, the mind trembles under the weight of longing. But this fire, if endured, becomes the crucible where a new consciousness is born. You begin to see that desire itself was never the enemy. Your slavery to it was, and in this realization, the self begins to separate from the body, the spirit from its cage. You start to witness your thoughts with precision. Your emotions no longer command you. They reveal you. Sleep becomes lighter, dreams deeper, intuition sharper. You begin to understand people not through words, but through the silent vibrations of their energy. Your presence changes. The same magnetism that once drew lovers now draws minds, opportunities, synchronicities. Living without sex isn't about denial, it's about direction. The energy doesn't vanish. It transmutes. What once moved downward now moves upward, into the nervous system, the imagination, the heart. It becomes art, discipline, vision. You start to feel like a vessel for something vast and invisible, a creative current that builds worlds instead of bodies. But beware, this path is not for the faint-hearted. Suppression is poison. Transmutation is medicine. The difference lies in awareness. If you merely fight your instincts, they will destroy you from within, corroding the mind with frustration and shame. But if you embrace them, understand them, and guide them, they become your wings. The sexual force, when understood, is the most sacred energy known to man, capable of creating life or awakening spirit. Those who live without sex consciously, not out of fear but out of mastery, begin to see life in its rawest form. They see beauty in restraint, strength in solitude, and power in stillness. Their gaze pierces illusion. Their aura radiates peace. They no longer chase, they attract, not people but purpose. And one day they realize something miraculous. The hunger that once haunted them was not for sex but for wholeness. The energy that once burned in the flesh now lights the mind. The same passion that once sought another's body now fuels their divine ascent. It's amazing what happens to the body and mind of those who live without sex, not because they reject it, but because they've discovered something greater, that the true act of creation is not between two bodies, but within one awakened soul. It begins with a question most never ask. What truly happens to our energy when we choose not to indulge our physical impulses? The common belief is that abstinence starves the body, drains vitality, or suppresses natural expression. But that is only the surface view, the interpretation of a mind accustomed to release, not reflection. In truth, the energy that drives sexual desire is the same current that fuels thought, art, and consciousness itself. When that current is withheld from its habitual outlet, it doesn't die and it transforms. It condenses, gathers, and begins to seek new pathways through the psyche, becoming the raw material of creativity, insight, and will. Every human being carries within them a tremendous reservoir of sexual energy. It is not merely a biological function, it is psychological fuel. This is the paradox. The most physical of instincts holds within it the seed of the most spiritual realization. The body knows this language before the intellect does. When that energy is not expressed outwardly, it presses inward, and if guided consciously, it rises through the nervous system, illuminating the mind. It sharpens awareness, heightens sensitivity, and awakens imagination. What was once a mere impulse becomes a force of inner construction, shaping thought, vision, and purpose. But here lies the danger and the mastery. When unspent sexual energy is left unconscious, It becomes restless, aggressive, even destructive. It begins to distort perception, leading to frustration, obsession, or despair. This is why so few can walk this path. The transformation of this energy requires awareness, not suppression, a redirection of instinct rather than its denial. The energy must be recognized for what it is, the purest expression of life itself, asking to be used with higher intelligence. Those who understand this begin to see that desire is not an enemy but a language, a communication between the instinctual and the divine. The body speaks in symbols the same way dreams do. The yearning one feels for another is at its core the yearning of consciousness to unite with something beyond itself, to touch eternity through sensation. When one lives without sex, that union is not abandoned. It is internalized. The physical act becomes a metaphor for a greater act, the merging of the lower and higher selves within one's own being. This transformation is not mystical poetry, it is psychological alchemy. Just as the alchemist sought to turn base metal into gold, the individual can turn instinct into inspiration. The fire of desire, instead of consuming the flesh, can be harnessed to forge character, discipline, and insight. The energy that once rushed outward now circulates inward, strengthening the will, purifying the thoughts, and crystallizing intention. The person becomes charged, their presence magnetic, their words weighty, their silence powerful. And yet this process cannot be forced. To attempt to repress the sexual current is to invite corruption of the soul. Repression is fear disguised as morality. Transmutation is courage guided by consciousness. The difference is subtle but absolute. One path builds walls, the other builds bridges. In repression, energy stagnates, festers, and breeds guilt. In transmutation, it flows, evolves, and awakens genius. The difference is awareness, the ability to face one's instincts without shame, to hold their fire without burning, and to direct that fire toward creation. When the body is no longer ruled by compulsion, it becomes an instrument of clarity. The mind is no longer fogged by craving, and perception deepens. You begin to notice things others miss. The tone behind a voice, the silence between words, the invisible pull of emotion in a room. You no longer move through life reacting. You move through it radiating. The same force that once sought pleasure now seeks purpose. Many artists, thinkers, and visionaries throughout history have unknowingly practiced this, not by moral command, but by inner necessity. Their intensity, their drive, their unyielding focus came from this same source. They discovered that creativity and sexuality are not opposites, but two expressions of the same life energy. To channel it upward is to expand awareness. To let it leak unconsciously is to remain bound by instinct. The choice determines whether one lives as an animal of impulse or an architect of meaning. And so, the energy paradox reveals itself. What appears as deprivation is actually concentration. What seems like loss is latent power. To live without sex consciously is to hold the lightning in one's hands, not to fear it, not to extinguish it, but to learn to direct it. This is not asceticism. It is mastery. It is the point where biology meets spirit, where instinct becomes intellect, and where desire itself becomes the teacher. In the end, the question is not whether you live with or without sex, but whether you live as a slave to your energy or a sculptor of it. Those who understand this no longer fear desire. They use it. They know that the same energy that builds empires and births art once whispered in their blood as lust. The transformation was never about denying life, but about discovering its higher form, because the truth is simple and profound. When you stop releasing your energy into the world begins to release its energy into you. The moment one decides to live without sexual indulgence, an invisible war begins, not between good and evil, but between instinct and awareness. It is a war fought on the terrain of the psyche, silent yet relentless, where every thought becomes a soldier and every impulse a weapon. Most never see this war because they are ruled by instinct. They obey it without question. But when one resists, when one refuses to be driven by the immediate hunger of the flesh, the mind awakens to its own depths. The conflict begins not as punishment, but as the first spark of consciousness. This inner struggle is not a sign of weakness. It is the proof of transformation. The body cries out for what it once knew, the rhythm of pleasure, the temporary dissolution of self through physical union. The mind, however, begins to see beyond the body's plea, It starts to observe the pattern, the rise of desire, the peak, the release, and the inevitable emptiness that follows. In that observation, something remarkable happens. The person begins to detach from the endless loop of gratification and becomes aware of the machinery behind it. They see that desire is not a master but a mechanism, one that can be studied, understood, and ultimately transcended. Yet this awareness does not come peacefully. The instincts are ancient, forged by evolution and repetition. To challenge them is to provoke the oldest parts of oneself, the primitive mind that lives for survival and pleasure. It will fight back. It will whisper through dreams, surge through memory, and flood the imagination with temptation. It will disguise itself as love, as connection, as comfort. It will try to convince you that to live without indulgence is to live without life. But those who endure this internal storm begin to discover a new layer of self, one untouched by compulsion, one that can choose rather than react. This is where strength is truly forged, not in domination of others, but in the mastery of one's own forces. To face desire without yielding is to witness your own duality, the human and the divine locked in dialogue. You begin to see that what you called pleasure was often an escape from emptiness, and that what you called need was sometimes only fear, fear of silence, fear of stillness, fear of meeting yourself without distraction. When the body is denied its habitual outlet, it doesn't simply quiet down. It starts to speak a deeper language. It reveals where you are weak, where you are unbalanced, where your sense of self depends too much on external stimulation. But the struggle is not meant to break you. It's meant to expose you, to make you conscious of the energies that move within. Every wave of desire is an opportunity to look inward, to ask, who is the one that desires? What part of me is speaking? Is it the body, the ego, or the soul? In the beginning, the answers are confusing, contradictory. The body demands, the mind resists, and the spirit watches. Yet over time, these voices begin to harmonize. The more you observe without judgment, the more the energy loses its grip and becomes available for transformation. Philosophically, this is the great paradox of self-control. Resistance leads not to repression, but to revelation. Each time you refuse to act on impulse, you reclaim a fragment of your power. The mind once scattered begins to focus. The emotions once turbulent start to settle. The will once divided becomes unified. And in that unity, something higher emerges, a sense of inner command that no external pleasure can give. You begin to feel alive not because something stimulated you, but because you are finally generating energy from within. Psychologically, this war is a purification. The sexual impulse is the most charged of all human drives. When it's no longer externalized, it forces everything unconscious to rise to the surface. Old wounds, hidden fears, unresolved desires, and all come forward to be seen. It is uncomfortable, even painful, but necessary, because the energy that once flowed outward is now turned inward, lighting up every shadow of the mind. Those who cannot face this illumination retreat, seeking relief in indulgence. Those who endure it emerge transformed, for they have faced the full spectrum of their humanity and learned to contain it. The philosopher within begins to see this battle not as denial of nature, but as dialogue with it. To live without sex for a time is not to reject life, but to refine one's relationship with it. It's learning to handle the raw forces of existence, desire, passion, creativity, without being consumed. In that sense, the person becomes both warrior and sage, fighting the chaos within, but not out of hatred for it, out of the desire to understand it. And slowly, the war becomes peace. The body learns discipline, the mind gains clarity, and the spirit expands. What was once chaos becomes coherence. What was once temptation becomes energy. What was once conflict becomes communion. This is not the suppression of instinct. It is its elevation. The sexual impulse is no longer an enemy. It becomes an ally, a source of fuel for consciousness itself. This is the essence of transformation, when instinct and intellect no longer fight for dominance, but dance in harmony. It is the moment when desire no longer blinds, but illuminates. Desire has always been misunderstood. Society either glorifies it or condemns it, but rarely understands its true nature. Most people see desire as a problem to satisfy or to suppress, never realizing it's actually a key, a force of transformation disguised as temptation. When a person learns to look beyond the surface of their craving, they begin to see that desire is not simply about sex or pleasure. It's the call of energy asking to evolve. It wants to move, to express, to create. What you feel as lust is, in truth, the soul's hunger for expansion. There's an ancient intelligence within the sexual force, something that predates language, morality, and even thought itself. It's the life current that built civilizations, painted art, wrote symphonies, and carved philosophy into the bones of humanity. When you suppress it, it rebels. When you indulge it blindly, it enslaves you. But when you direct it consciously, it transforms you. This is the alchemy of desire, the process by which what is raw and carnal becomes refined and creative. It's not about denying passion. It's about elevating it. The same fire that burns can also illuminate. Think of the sexual impulse as the most primal form of energy available to human consciousness. It is instinctive, unfiltered, and deeply rooted in the body. But this same energy, when guided upward through awareness, becomes the source of intuition, inspiration, and insight. That's why those who learn to transmute it often radiate a certain magnetism, not because they are repressing something, but because they are containing it, channeling it, letting it circulate through higher centers of thought and perception. It's like electricity, dangerous when uncontrolled, yet capable of lighting entire cities when properly directed. Psychologically, this transformation begins the moment one stops identifying with the craving itself. Instead of saying, "I am aroused," one begins to observe, "Arousal is occurring in me." That small shift from identification to observation opens the door to mastery. You no longer become the emotion. You become its witness. This distance allows the energy to rise instead of explode. The body may still burn, but the mind becomes clear enough to guide that fire toward creation. In that moment, you are no longer a slave to desire. You are its artist. Philosophically, this process mirrors the eternal human struggle between the lower and higher self. The lower seeks release, the higher seeks meaning. Both are valid, but their harmony requires intelligence. When the lower self is denied, it festers. When it's overindulged, it consumes. But when it's understood, when it's seen as the raw material for inner growth, it becomes sacred. The energy that once pulled you downward begins to lift you. You start to experience a subtle joy that has nothing to do with stimulation and everything to do with clarity. This is not abstinence, it's evolution. In this state, creativity flourishes. Artists, thinkers, and spiritual seekers throughout history have spoken of this mysterious link between celibacy and genius. But what they truly discovered wasn't that sex is evil. It's that sexual energy, when sublimated, feeds the mind with extraordinary power. It gives birth to ideas, visions, and inventions because it's the same energy that creates life. Whether that life takes the form of a child, a painting, or a philosophy depends only on the direction of your will. The transformation of desire, however, requires honesty. Many mistake suppression for mastery. They bury their instincts under guilt and fear, only to find them resurfacing later as anxiety, aggression, or obsession. Real transmutation demands openness. You must face your desire without judgment, see it clearly for what it is, a movement of life, and then choose to elevate it. This is the difference between repression and refinement. One kills the fire, the other reshapes it. When this energy is refined, it begins to express itself as clarity of thought, compassion, and presence. You no longer seek validation through another's body. You find fulfillment within your own consciousness. The mind feels lighter, the emotions steadier, the body more alive. You move through the world not hungry but radiant, your very being charged with meaning. The craving that once distracted you now drives you toward mastery, creativity, and service. This is why the ancients described sexual energy as both poison and medicine. It destroys the unaware and heals the wise. And yet the process never ends. The alchemy of desire is not a one-time act, but a lifelong practice. Each wave of longing that arises becomes another opportunity to rise higher, to create something, to understand yourself more deeply. It's a dialogue between your finite self and the infinite energy that moves through you. The more you engage it consciously, the more you realize that desire is not meant to be feared or fought. It's meant to be understood. Ultimately, desire teaches us one profound truth. Nothing in life is inherently base or sacred. Everything depends on the level of consciousness you bring to it. The same energy that binds you can also liberate you if you know how to hold it without falling into it. So the next time desire arises, don't rush to satisfy it or silence it. Let it burn, watch it, feel its intensity, its power. Then ask yourself, what could this energy become if I didn't let it escape through habit? Because in that question lies your transformation. There's a fine and often invisible line between repression and transmutation, and most people never learn to tell the difference. One destroys the mind, the other liberates it. To repress desire is to bury a living force under layers of fear and shame. To transmute it is to hold that same force in awareness and guide it toward creation. The difference may seem subtle, but psychologically it changes everything. Repression splits the psyche in two. Transmutation unites it. One leads to shadow, the other to light. When people attempt to suppress their sexual energy, they usually do so under moral pressure, guilt, or fear of judgment. They push the energy down, hoping it will disappear. But the psyche does not forget what the conscious mind denies. The repressed force doesn't vanish. It turns inward, disguising itself in neurosis, anxiety, or obsessive thoughts. It becomes distorted, feeding the very impulses it was meant to control. You can see this in those who claim purity, but radiate inattention. They've confused denial with mastery. Their restraint is brittle because it's born of fear, not understanding. True transmutation begins not with denial, but with awareness. You don't push the energy away. You face it directly. You feel its heat, its power, its beauty, and you realize that this is life itself. There is nothing shameful about it. The same energy that drives lust also fuels love, art, genius, and faith. It is one current, one intelligence appearing in different forms. When you stop labeling it as sin or virtue, you can finally begin to guide it. Awareness becomes the crucible, and desire becomes the raw gold. Psychologically, the moment you face this force without judgment, you integrate the parts of yourself that were once exiled. The shadow, all the rejected impulses, fantasies, and instincts, begins to emerge, and though uncomfortable, it brings healing. You see that what you feared was not evil. It was merely unintegrated. Every instinct, when brought into consciousness, transforms. The aggressive becomes assertive. The lustful becomes passionate. The chaotic becomes creative. The process of transmutation is, therefore, not about suppression but conversion, turning instinct into intelligence. The greatest mistake spiritual seekers make is trying to destroy desire instead of redeeming it. Desire is not the enemy of enlightenment. Ignorance is. If you cut off your instincts, you cut off your vitality. You can't climb toward the divine with half your nature amputated. Instead, you must learn to carry your desire upward, to let it illuminate rather than consume you. That is why this path is psychological, not dogmatic. It requires courage to meet yourself as you are, to sit in the fire of longing without escaping into indulgence or repression. The act of transmutation can feel like walking a tightrope between ecstasy and discipline. On one side lies indulgence, on the other, denial. But balance is found not in avoidance, it's in awareness. Each wave of desire that arises becomes an invitation to practice. You observe it without surrendering to it, allowing its energy to rise through your being. You'll feel it shift, first as tension in the body, then as clarity in the mind, and finally as stillness in the heart. The same fire that once ruled you becomes the light that guides you. Philosophically, this transformation speaks to the unity of opposites. The instinctual and the spiritual are not enemies but complements. They are two ends of the same pole of life energy. The more consciously you hold them together, the more power you generate. Every human being is a bridge between heaven and earth, animal and divine, and the purpose of transmutation is to make that bridge stable. To repress the lower is to destroy the foundation. To indulge it blindly is to lose the height. Only integration allows transcendence. When this integration occurs, something remarkable changes in one's presence. The person no longer vibrates with repressed tension or scattered craving. Their energy becomes refined, calm, magnetic. People are drawn to them not by lust, but by the quiet intensity of their being. They radiate strength without aggression, passion without chaos. This is the natural result of energy that has been mastered rather than misused. It's not purity in the moral sense, it's wholeness in the psychological sense. But make no mistake, this process demands vigilance. The old patterns of repression and indulgence will always attempt to reappear. The mind must learn to stay awake, to feel without reacting, to desire without grasping. This is what gives birth to true freedom. Not the absence of desire, but the ability to navigate it consciously, to live in harmony with your energy, rather than in bondage to it. And through that harmony, a deeper intelligence reveals itself. You begin to understand that life never intended you to kill your instincts. It wanted you to evolve them. Desire was never a trap, it was a test. It asked, will you be consumed by me, or will you use me to awaken? When a person learns to live consciously without sex, something remarkable begins to happen. Not a loss, not a suppression, but a transformation so profound that it reshapes both mind and body. It's as if a new intelligence awakens within them, one that operates beyond instinct and impulse. The same energy that once sought expression through pleasure now begins to serve a higher function, the birth of the higher self. This transformation is not a denial of human nature. It's the evolution of it. It is what happens when the raw force of life, instead of being spent outwardly, is refined inwardly until it becomes light, insight, and presence. At first, this process feels unnatural. The body still remembers the old rhythm of release, the constant pull of attraction, the quick satisfaction that once defined comfort. But as one remains aware and disciplined, a subtle shift occurs. The sexual energy, no longer expelled, begins to accumulate, not as tension but as vitality. The body grows stronger, the mind clearer, and the emotions more stable. What was once restless becomes radiant. You start to sense a current of aliveness within you, a quiet electricity that fuels not only thought and creativity, but also a deeper sense of purpose. This is the paradox of abstinence. The less you chase pleasure, the more alive you become. The individual who learns to harness this energy realizes that desire was never about another person. It was about the energy of life itself, seeking higher expression. And once it is freed from its physical habit, it finds new paths, through art, intellect, compassion, and intuition. You begin to see that everything in existence is animated by the same current. To live without sex consciously is to tune directly into that current, to touch the creative core of being itself. Psychologically, this awakening brings integration. The divided self, the one torn between craving and guilt, indulgence and denial, begins to dissolve. The inner war quiets because the energy that once fueled conflict is now unified. You stop fighting your nature and begin to refine it. The mind becomes a lens instead of a battlefield. The energy that was once chaotic now moves with precision. You begin to think more deeply, feel more subtly, and act with greater intention. The higher self is not a mystical entity that descends from above. It is born from the disciplined reorganization of your own energy. This rebirth also awakens intuition. When sexual energy rises instead of disperses, it heightens perception. You start to sense things before they happen, to understand people beyond words. It's as though the nervous system becomes an instrument, tuned to the unseen. You recognize patterns, motives, and emotions that others overlook. There's a certain authority in this awareness, not the authority of control, but of clarity. It gives you presence, a calm, steady gravity that draws respect and trust without demanding it. Spiritually, the transformation deepens. The energy that once bound you to instinct now connects you to something vast and luminous. The longing that once sought another body becomes a longing for truth. The same passion that once consumed you becomes devotion, to knowledge, to art, to life itself. You begin to feel a unity with existence that is not based on possession but on perception. You realize that the essence of sex was never merely physical. It was the human attempt to experience union, and when that union is found within, it transcends the body entirely. Philosophically, this evolution reveals something fundamental about human nature, that we are not meant to destroy instinct, but to transcend it. The animal within us is not the enemy. It's the foundation upon which consciousness stands. To reject it is to weaken yourself. To understand it is to master yourself. The person who lives without sex consciously is not escaping life, but learning to participate in it from a higher plane. They live with greater sensitivity, greater creativity, greater self-command. Their very being becomes proof that energy, when disciplined, becomes intelligence. And yet this transformation is not for the complacent. It demands awareness, patience, and honesty. There will be days when the energy feels unbearable, when temptation tests the limits of your resolve. But those are the moments of real initiation, when instinct and will collide and something new is born in their tension. Each time you choose awareness over impulse, you strengthen the higher self. Each time you turn inward instead of outward, you polish the mirror of your soul. Over time, you begin to experience a quiet ecstasy, not born of indulgence but of alignment. You are no longer fragmented. You are whole. The reward is not a crown of moral superiority, but freedom, the freedom to direct your life consciously rather than being dragged by the invisible strings of desire. The freedom to create, to think, to love, without dependency or fear. This is what it means to evolve, to take the same forces that once ruled you and make them instruments of your becoming. The one who learns to live without sex, not out of repression, but from awareness, does not lose passion. They discover a higher form of it, one that burns steady, clean, and eternal.